Everyone probably knows the legend of Galileo Galilei, the man who pointed a telescope at the stars and defied the people and the world as he bodily declared, "The Earth is not the center of the universe." He is known as the father of science, the man who innovated astronomy, and the man with the biggest balls in the world to slap every one human being on and say, "The Earth is not the center of the universe. You're not special." However, this is only scratching the surface. You see, Galileo Galilei, he was a mathematician who could see the patterns and chaos of falling objects. He philosophized that nature was connected to mathematics, the greatest enemy of 80% of the world. But he made up for this by becoming an inventor, creating his own tools because none existed. He provoked out thoughts, our world beliefs, and our pride. Unfortunately, all great minds must die young. He was dragged down from his throne of knowledge, called a heretic because he knew too much and he was spouting nonsense. He had the evidence to back it up. He was a danger to Rome power. Stay tuned for this video and immerse yourself into the story of Galileo Galilei, the man who left his mark on the world. But first, like and subscribe for more. The life of Galileo Galilei began in 1564, in the 15th century of February, under the fresh sky of Pisa, Italy, unharmed by global warming. It was beautiful and breathtaking. In this world, Galileo Galilei was born. Luckily for him, he wasn't born to a peasant. He was born to Vincenzo Galilei, a musician and music theorist. He always questioned tradition and believed in testing the rules that kept the world in balance. Despite this, he was fortunate enough to marry Giulia degli Amanmati, a stunning and wealthy noblewoman who shaped Galileo's early life. But surprisingly, wealth didn't create Galileo, it was ideas. Money only allowed him to do as he pleased. He was the firstborn of 6 children. His family was a strange one. Despite their wealth, they did not dive deep into pleasure. Instead, they dived deep into the mind and wonders of this world. But the one who had the most impact on Galileo was his father, who, just like him, had a restless mind. He taught Galileo that knowledge should be tested, not inherited. Obviously, he was years above his time. However, Vincenzo wasn't just talk. He challenged the musical theories of ancient Greece, with only his strings and rhythm, proving that strings varied with tension, not length. So it's not just the size, it's how you use it. So that's how Galileo learned that it may be old, but that doesn't mean it's right. This is a truth many have failed to grasp. This was how the musical torch of musical rebellion was passed from a father to his son. As a result, throughout his childhood, he lived by this knowledge. When he was 17, he stood atop the Leaning Tower of Pisa, holding 2 cannonballs of different weight. I get goosebumps just thinking about doing that from such a height, which only shows the bare minimum he's willing to go for understanding. At that time, it was thought that heavier objects fell faster than lighter ones, which was declared by Aristotle centuries ago. However, Galileo did not trust the words of the past, so he released each ball at the same time and observed with the eye of an eagle as they fell to the ground. This may seem extreme, but this isn't even scratching the surface. Galileo began challenging the words of Aristotle, which held Rome together for 2,000 years. His ideas were law, sacred, shouldn't even be questioned by the rules of Rome, or even he run the risk of being seen as a fool. However, Galileo had no fear of this. He feared not being called a fool, but following the fools like a sheep. As a result, he was willing to start a rebellion against Aristotle. But let's not get carried away. It's not time yet for this battle. In a dim, quiet cathedral, Galileo, as a young student, had his eyes fixed on a brass lamp swinging gently from the ceiling. Many of us would see an ornament or just a flickering light.
But Galileo saw a rhythm that was being orchestrated by the universe. By touching his wrist, he was able to time each swing, and his discovery defined common sense. No matter how far or near its swing, it took the same amount of time to reach its position. This was not documented in any history books, churches, or scholars, yet it was swinging above the head of these faithful believers. That's why he realized nature had its own clock on. She's never late. This was his first scientific discovery, which is quite impressive since he did it with his pulse, heartbeat, and a mind tuned to the world. Some years passed, and he grew into a man that could no longer stand the outdated beliefs of the people. A perfect heaven neatly arranged, with the earth at the center, unmoving and divine. However, Galileo had questions that haunted his sleep, that kept him up at night. But that was when a rumor spread across the sea. A strange, small device, which was just a tube, glass, and wood, that could bring far-away device closer. When this was created, people saw it as a novelty for spotting ships. But to Galileo, it was more. It was hope. It was his salvation. So he did something astonishing. He built a better one. You know this instrument has the telescope. As he aimed the telescope at the sky, his hands trembled, not from fear, it was knowing that he was about to shake the foundation of Rome. When he looked through the telescope, what greeted him was not perfection, but unlimited beauty, yet it was imperfect. He saw craters on the moon, something that seemed like small moons circling Jupiter. The stars was too many to count. It was a horrific discovery, something he never thought he would see. This discovery didn't just challenge a theory, not did it only challenge Rome, it challenged the way people saw God. Despite this, night after night, he took his telescope on, examined the sky. He napped shadows crawling across the moon, watched Venus wax and wane like the moon itself. Then he turned his gaze towards Jupiter, the bright golden wandering star in the sky. But something was wrong. He saw not one point of light, but given 4 tiny sparks near it. This discovery was shocking, so much so that Galileo had to check 10 more times, then 10 more nights, and he finally accepted it. They were moving. It was moving, like a rhythm. It was a dance of gravity, circling Jupiter like a miniature solar system. These things that he thought were stars were actually moons that did not orbit Earth. He named them Io, Europa, Ganymede, Callisto. These were his 4 loyal companions, defying centuries of belief. If you're saying, what's the big deal? Then ask yourself, if these moons were orbiting Jupiter and not Earth, isn't it possible that not everything orbited Earth, and maybe Earth's not the center of the universe? Poets, philosophers, and even priests praised the moon for its beauty and purity. But Galileo was not in love with the moon. No, he was in love with truth. So night after night, he turned his telescope upwards, and there it was again, the moon, closer than anyone has ever seen it. He began taking measurements, and what he realized, it wasn't smooth. So he leaned closer, adjusted the lens, watched the shadows stretch and retreat as the moon turned, not soft shadows, instead sharp ones, like mountains casting dark teeth across a barren plain. He traced the jagged edges of ridges, watched craters catch the rising sun, and in those shadows, he found truth. The moon had height, depth, wounds. It wasn't a perfect sphere. It was battered, scarred, like Earth. He began to sketch what he saw as proof and has reverence to this discovery. Over time, his study was filled with candlelight flickering against a tower of notes, sketches, and sleepless nights. While the world rested, he was restless. He was enchanted by the spinning of the stars, the wandering planets, and the moon that whispered so many stories. Yet he could not keep this to himself. The old world has cracks, and he needed to tear it wide open. But how will he tell the world you were wrong for more than a century? Well, for Galileo, it was quite simple. In the spring of 1610, he picked up his quill and dipped it in ink. With his fingers stained from nights of charcoal sketches and ink-scribbled observations, he was meticulous not to make any mistakes. In the end, this book was 24 pages long. In this book was a new universe. He wrote of the moon and its mountains, Jupiter and its 4 moons, and the stars so numerous they seemed to pour from God's own hands. When this book was printed, it was named Sidereus Nuncius. This book did not build dust in the shelves. It brought on uproar like the battle cry of Sparta. Like a wildfire, word spread. In Venice, scholars began to debate in the streets, holding copies like holy texts. In Rome, news spread from palace to pulpit that a man from Pisa had changed the stars itself. And this day crowds gathered to see Galileo, who had transformed into a prophet. Those who had never cared for astronomy suddenly twisted their necks at the night sky. Sailors, merchants, cardinals, kings, all asking, could this be true? Some were amazed, but others were terrified. The telescope, once seen as a toy, became an instrument of revelation. Copies were ordered across Europe. Every nobleman wanted one. Every scientist tried to replicate what Galileo had seen. But they weren't just looking through glass, they were looking into the unknown. Galileo sent a copy of Starry Messenger to the Grand Duke of Tuscany, Cosimo II, his former student and now one of the most powerful rulers in Italy. Galileo named the 4 moons of Jupiter after the Medici family. It was a brilliant move. After all, flattery is the greatest shield. In science, wore the armor of royalty as a result of Galileo's expertise. Cosimo appointed him chief mathematician and philosopher to the Grand Duke. He was now untouchable.
At least for now. Behind cathedral walls, theologians weren't happy. They ponder if the earth is not the center of the world, then what is? If the heavens are not perfect, is the scriptures wrong? This was the beginning of a silent war, yet Galileo kept writing, without a care in the world. He debated through ink, challenged through texts, and invited the world to see not with their beliefs, but with their eyes. He urged all who doubted him to look through the telescope and see if they could deny this truth. Unfortunately, many doubted him still and ruined their reputation as the truth was right in front of their face. Soon others joined him. The Copernican model, once thought to be heretics, began to grow louder. Soon Galileo's home became a battleground of correspondence. He answered critics, guided students, and planned his next steps. At first, the world celebrated him. He had lifted the veil from the heavens, shown that Jupiter wore moons like a crown, that Earth was not alone in motion. Princes invited him to court. Dukes raised their glasses to his name. Artists painted his likeness. Scribes copied his words. He became a man of letters not just among scholars, but among rulers. Florence, Venice, even Rome, they opened their gates to him. Unfortunately, his enemies began to take action sooner than later. The Jesuits, once his allies in Rome, began to grow distant. Scholars who had stood beside him now stood behind him, and then further back. Some accused him of vanity, others of deception. They said he used tricks in his telescope, that the moons wasn't real, that somehow he brainwashed everyone into seeing something entirely different. One by one, doors began to close. Invitations stopped. Letters cooled. Eyes looked away. Still, he went harder and did not give up. Some time passed on. In 1616, the church issued a decree. The heliocentric theory that the earth moved around the sun was deemed formally heretical. Galileo still had some fans, so he was not condemned, but he was warned. He was told to stay silent, to teach the Copernican model only as a hypothetical tool, not as reality. He nodded, he agreed, outwardly at least. But inside, his fire did not die. He continued to watch the stars, and well, this was a strategical retreat. Years passed, then in 1623, a new pope was elected, Urban VIII. This was Galileo's last chance. Luckily, Urban had once admired Galileo's work. They shared conversations, ideas, and even jokes. And now that friend wore the triple crown. So this time, he wrote again. A grand dialogue. On once again, time repeated itself. People came out, they praised him, they feared him. However, the people were not complete fools, they realized. The character who defended the geocentric model was a fool, a clown, a stubborn shadow of the past. And that character bore a striking resemblance to the Pope. Soon the man who once praised him now summoned him to Rome, unfortunately not for a friendly chat, but for a trail. And that's when he noticed that many of the hands he had shaken had let go and left him to the wolves. Unfortunately, Galileo saw it as liberation. To others, it was heresy with a lens. The Jesuits, who had initially supported his work and confirmed his observations, began to distance themselves. They too were scientists, but they were also guardians of doctrine. The idea that Earth moved, that the heavens were not fixed, was more than inconvenient. It was dangerous. Galileo had always believed that truth could live beside faith, that Scripture taught how to go to heaven, not how the heavens go. But he underestimated how tightly faith clung to certainty, and how threatening his telescope became to those who preached the immovable. To add salt to the wound, a former student mocked him in print, twisting his arguments into caricatures. Old allies turned cold. Scholars who once cited him now omitted his name. Letters that once praised his work now condemned his tone, too proud, too forcible, too sure. Now with that cleared up, let's get back to the trail. He was summoned to trail for heresy. At this time he was 70 years old. His body trembled, not from guilt, but from age. The judges believe he had embarrassed them by degrading the cosmos. He had published a book, Dialogue Concerning the Two Chief World Systems, and in it he had let reason speak too loudly. Because of this, it was no longer about science, but politics and pride. Galileo tried to explain that he wrote in dialogue, that he gave voice to both sides, that he had obeyed the church's instructions, even placed a preface approved by Rome. But it didn't matter. What mattered was that his fictional character, the simpleton named Simplicio, had echoed the Pope's arguments. And in that echo, the church heard mockery, and it became personal. They interrogated him multiple times. Did he truly believe the earth moved? Did he deny Scripture? Was he leading others to doubt? They offered him mercy, but mercy came with conditions. He could live, yes, but he had to kneel. He had to deny his work, deny the evidence, deny the laws of motion that had driven him since his youth. Truth or survival? And Galileo chose to live. Before witnesses, he recanted. He read the words they handed him. I abjure, curse, and detest the aforementioned errors and heresies. And with those words, Europe exhaled. The church had won. Or so they thought, because though he whispered what they demanded, inside the fire never went out. And legend has it, as he rose to his feet, he muttered under his breath, E por si muove, and yet it moves.